Invincible, the animated series, based on the 2003 comic book of the same name, written by Robert Kirkman, illustrated by Corey Walker, who was then succeeded by Ryan Ottley. Kirkman's most famous work is probably The Walking Dead, his creator-owned title Image, which has since become a super successful television series, and I guess Kirkman's attempting to do the same with Invincible. The show, much like the comic, is based on the character of Mark Grayson, a 17-year-old high school student who discovers he has superpowers and decides to get into the world of superheroing. Mark is the son of the premier superhero in this universe, called Omni-Man. He is the Superman analog in this universe. He doesn't exactly have the same powers, but they have a similar alien origin, and their aesthetic is very similar in that he has an iconic symbol on his chest. So you can very much see that the intention was that Omni-Man is the Superman of the universe. I think in some of Kirkman's original ideas, the character was intended to be called Superman, but they thought that was a bit too on the nose, so opted for Omni-Man instead. And the character of Invincible was originally called Bulletproof. So I guess I will start by going through some of the similarities and differences from the comic. I started reading Invincible in 2009 based on its recommendation from the iFanboy podcast. This was around 2009, so there was quite a lot of content for me to catch up on because the series started in 2003. And I just instantly fell in love. There was everything I'd ever wanted in a superhero property. Action, drama, teen angst, colourfulness, optimism, humour. In an era where fans would complain about reboots and events every week, Invincible found ways to execute them flawlessly. It was all there, and the show is no different. So the series stays true to the essence of the comic. I would say things are streamlined, some characters have got some sleek new redesigns, and some characters have been gender swapped or race swapped. I think it's just to make it a more diverse cast. But some of these changes aren't just cosmetic, they've also taken the time to create new characterizations and recontextualize things for a more modern audience. One of the more obvious examples of this is Amber. She is one of Mark's classmates and eventually becomes his love interest. In the comic book, she's Caucasian and blonde. She's a bit of an airhead, and she doesn't really offer much to Mark in terms of his growth as a person and as a hero. But in this, she's a black woman. She's quite stubborn, fiery tempered. She's someone that has a very big sense of community. She volunteers at her local soup kitchen. She's very into history and politics. She's very, very different from the comic book version. She's much more of a tomboy, much more self-assured. I personally think she becomes a bit unlikable towards the end of the show because of her reaction to particular information. But at the same time, I think she's very important in the sense that she calls Mark out on his BS. She's the one who reminds him that he's breaking promises. She's the one that sort of lets him know that he's fucking up. But I do feel there was a bit of a missed opportunity here, because I feel like if you're going to change a character's race or gender, then we should tackle something based on the consequences of that change. So for example, Amber is a black woman. Mark is half Caucasian, half East Asian. I'm assuming Japanese, or there is not specified. And it's interesting because the way Mark's mother's drawn in the comics, I just always assumed she was a white woman. But obviously in the show, she's animated to look as if she is East Asian, and the voice actress is East Asian. So I'm not sure if that's a swap or if that was always intended. And later on, we come to see that Viltrumites come with different phenotypes and shades of skin, like humans. So I guess what I'm getting at is just there could have been a very interesting look at what it means to be in an interracial relationship. The highs, the lows, the intricacies, the difficulties. Could have even had one family not really being too pro interracial relationships. So this is not to say that I wanted them to spend a massive chunk of time on that, but it's just something they could have explored. We're also introduced to his best friend William, and there are some changes from the comic here as well. In the comic, William is a closeted homosexual. He actually ends up being in a relationship with Eve at a point, and I think they probably changed this because some of the jokes that they put in the comic around that wouldn't come off the same way in this current time. They'd probably come off more offensive than they were at that time. So I think that they had him be openly gay just from the start, just to avoid any kind of insensitivity. And William is mostly the same. He's very brash, a bit self-centered, a bit obnoxious, but he is someone that has a deep connection with Mark, and they're very close, and we do see that closeness play out throughout the series. and I'm interested to see where they go with this character, because I think in the comic the majority of his sort of story beats were based around him being in the closet. So now that that's not part of the equation, I'm interested to sort of see where that goes. We're introduced to Cecil Stedman, who's kind of like the Nick Fury of the universe. Everyone's here. The first season roughly adapts the first 19 issues of Invincible, so we do get a lot. We dive into the world, we see it from quite a few aspects. We have an all-star cast of voice actors. The only flaws I think the series has are possibly the animation. I think the animation is a bit weak at times, but I'll allow that considering we get 40-minute episodes with this great cast and this great story. But it could definitely improve. I think also for me the pacing could have been a bit better, but I don't know if it's because I'm a comic reader or not. I think it potentially is. There is a big reveal in episode 8. I would have probably preferred if that reveal was in episode 6 and there was more of a fallout sort of dealing with it arc for the characters. I won't go into it in depth right now. I'll save the spoilers for the end of the video. But yeah, I think that is because of my comic book reader tinted glasses, because just I knew what was coming and I was really anticipating it. But I think they did a good job for people that aren't aware of the source material. I think they left enough intrigue and suspense around the particular characters involved in the reveal that it was a really big payoff for non-comic book readers. But I do think that because it happened in the very last episode of the season, there was the potential for people to just sort of like guess what the reveal was going to be, what the twist was. Just because I think they left it for such a long period of time, there was enough time to sort of collect enough information and think, okay, it's going to be this, and this. But at the same time, I do think they threw a lot of twists and turns that, were quite interesting and unique for the series, for the animated version of the series. The series does a really, really great job of immersing the audience in the universe and showing you a lot of the lore, so you get familiar with things very, very quickly. We are immediately introduced to the Guardians of the Globe, who are like the Justice League of the universe. We see how they coordinate. We see how they sort of have really different relationships with each other. We meet the Teen Team, who's like the Teen Titans, or the Young Justice team. We sort of see their characters, their powers. We're introduced to things very, very quickly, and you get very, very familiar with things off the bat. It builds on the superhero trope in a way that's familiar, but also feels so fresh and rejuvenating for the genre. I mean, it even goes into the most minute details. I mean, we see some of the criminal underbelly. We see how heroes get their costumes made. So, like, we're really thrown into this universe. The stakes are always high, and we see that Mark has his issues. He doesn't, just jump in and start kicking ass. He loses a lot of the fights, and I think it was interesting to see people's reaction to this, because people are used to seeing the young superhero getting into the role but then being good at it almost immediately. For me, Mark is the perfect blend between a character like Superman and Spider-Man. He has that youth and he has that exuberance, but at the same time he has a legacy to live up to, and he's not quite powerful enough to just do anything at the click of a finger. He does get a lot more powerful as the series goes on, so I'm assuming they'll do the same thing in the show. But I love that we see him acknowledge that he's completely out of his depth. We do see him struggle to sort of like get into the life and keep things copacetic, to keep everything else level in his life. As soon as he starts superheroing, his grades start to slip. His relationships, they take a strain, except for his relationships with other superheroes. So it's really, really good to see the way this series deals with that. So yeah, overall, I probably would say that Invincible so far is the best superhero property adaptation of this year, and it might be my favorite of all time. In terms of numbers, I'd probably give it a strong 8 out of 10. The only things holding it back are the animation and the pacing a little bit. Now, I guess I will go on to spoilers. You've been warned. So, at the end of episode 1, we get a glimpse of the Omni-Man reveal. Every episode has an after credit scene. We see the Guardians of the Globe gather in their lair, and we see Omni-Man take them out one at a time. And it's crazy because I was very shocked that they put this at the end of the first episode. This is something that happened, I want to say, in issue 6, 7, or 8 of the comic. And even then, I think there was a bit more mystery and intrigue, because there were inklings of something being off with Omni-Man in the comics. There were inklings. There were moments where he just didn't seem quite right, but they weren't glaring enough to really put anything together. But then that moment when he kills the Guardians in the comics, and it's a moment because it's a 2-page spread, and he just kills them all instantaneously. Whereas with this, it was a lot grittier. They put up a fight. It was a lot more palpable. There was so much tension. It was tangible. When Red Rush is punching Omni-Man's chest to try and get him to stop squeezing his head, like you felt that. It was very visceral, and it was this incredible scene. And I think it was incredible not just because of its shock value. I think it was just incredible the way it played out in terms of a narrative. You could see these people are completely confused as to why this man would do this. This is the person they fought beside. The Immortal even says he would never do this. He must be mind controlled or something like that. And it's interesting because they do kind of set up this tension between Omni-Man and the rest of the Guardians because he's not technically part of the team. But at the same time, there's this element of camaraderie and friendship that is there, that is suggested through the dialogue. But in the comics, in the comics, when it happens, it's very different because the Immortal just says, "Oh, I never liked you anyway," and then Nolan just kills him. So, yeah, seeing this play out in the animated series, it was really good. It was really, really good. And for me, I guess I'm of two minds of why. Like, I think it was great to put it at the end of the first episode as this thing to get people to keep on watching. But at the same time, I think that then it offsets the pacing because the rest of the season, you're wondering why Omni-Man would do this. And I think if it had happened maybe in episode 2 or 3, and then we got the reveal in episode 6, and then the fallout from the reveal in episode 7 and 8, it would have felt a bit smoother. But instead we had this high impact moment. Then things were just happening. We have the robot subplot, but again, there's not much intrigue in that. And then you get the final Omni-Man reveal in episode 8, and for me, the way they played that out, I think the best episode in the season is definitely episode 7. I think episode 7 is great. The tension, Omni-Man is basically he's like a shark. He's like Jaws. And he's getting closer and closer and closer to his target. And we're seeing they're literally throwing everything, the kitchen sink, at him. And he keeps on coming. He's like the Terminator. He's like Freddy Krueger. He's like Jason. There's nothing that can stop him. He's got no morals. And it's scary. And then we finally get that reveal of the true nature of the Viltrumites. So the Viltrumites are the race that Mark and Nolan hail from. And essentially, they are like Saiyans, so they go around taking over planets, destabilizing planets to add to their empire. And Nolan's been tasked to Earth, so his whole pretense of being a superhero is a complete facade. So seeing that visceral reaction of Mark hearing his dad's true intentions, his dad's quote-unquote true feelings, which we see aren't really his true feelings by the end of the episode, and the violence that occurs after it, it's so crazy. Like, watching episode 8, I think the storytelling was great because Mark is trying his hardest to still be a hero in this moment. He's just had this huge bombshell dropped on him. He's disorientated. He's trying to save people and he just can't. He's no match for his dad. And there's this great scene where his dad hits him and he goes flying and he smashes through a building. Yeah, it was brutal. The violence, it was hyper violent. And it's interesting because the comic is hyper violent, but I don't know, when I was reading it, I think it's not really until the Conquest arc that you really see the level of gore. But this show, the level of gore is on 10 from the first episode. So yeah, it was a bit shocking. But regardless of that, I'm really looking forward to the show going forward in the future. It's been greenlit for a season 2 and 3, so I'm delighted to hear that. I can't wait to see the rest of the series adapted. I think Invincible is probably the best comic book run I've ever read. 144 issues of pure brilliance. So I'm really, really excited about the show going forward. And I think this kind of sets a precedent for me where I think I'm a bit more inclined to want to see some of the lesser known properties adapted. I think they often produce more interesting things, just because with Marvel and DC, you can't do as much with particular characters because they're attached to the companies. You can't step too far out of the box of familiarity, except for like in things like Injustice, which again, for me, feels more like a bastardization than actually something very interesting. But going forward, I'm really excited to see what Invincible can do for the superhero genre. But yeah, let me know what you think of the series down below in the comments.